Hey guys, welcome back to the Max Spence Business Podcast. Today's guest is Danielle Farage. So we're going to be talking about being a workplace futurist, what that job is like, how do you get into the industry. We're also going to be covering what is a community builder and what that job is like as well. Danielle is a Gen Z workplace futurist. She's also the director of growth and marketing at Cafe, and she's also a community manager at Workplace Cafe Community. So before we get into today's show, if you guys can please smash the like button, that would help out a ton with the show. So without further ado, it's great to have you on the show today, Danielle.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Max. Awesome to be here.
Awesome. So why don't we jump into this? I know you're very active on LinkedIn. So, for people that maybe haven't come across any of your content, where did you grow up? What school did you go to? And what was your first passion?
Yeah, I grew up in Manhattan, so the Big Apple, Upper West Side. And I went to a small Jewish private school, literally a block away from me. And the thing about the school that I think really translates in the rest of my life is that it was dual curriculum. So I learned English and Hebrew at the same time. And it kind of forced me to have varying perspectives. And also we did a ton of Jewish learning, which is like studying, stories and coming up with different interpretations of small words and phrases, and also key learnings from stories. And I think just like growing up around that really forced me to develop like critical thinking very early on in my life. And then I was also in New York City, which is like a melting pot, which is really cool. And yeah, I would say my first passion in life was actually gymnastics. So I did it at like the 92nd Street Y. It was really fun. And then I think when I was in like second grade, I was like, this is getting too hard. Backflips, that's too risky for me. And then I was kind of like, all right, next.
Oh, okay. Okay, awesome. So, like with your gymnastics, did you do like, did you compete at all? Like, or was it just more for like, were you competing, or was it just more for fun and, after school activity type stuff?
It was more recreational. And then after gymnastics, I did dancing, and dancing was kind of a little bit more competitive. I went to like a summer camp where I did, the dance show and stuff like that. And then after dancing, it was like sewing, and then I finally did compete at one point. I'm not a very competitive person, but I did compete in this science program called NYSEF, New York City Science and Engineering Fair. I won an award there for excellence in research from the American Psychological Association. So that was cool. Yeah.
Awesome. So that's really interesting. So how did you get into, the jobs you're in today, right? Like being a workplace futurist, like, to be honest, actually doing this podcast, that's the first time I've actually heard of that. So I had to do some research a little bit about that, like understanding what is a futurist, like what do they sort of do, and like what is that job title, right? Because I think there's probably a lot of people that are in maybe the same situation as me. There's like haven't really come across that job title, right? Because it's, in high school or you get into university, you don't really hear about that, right? So what is a workplace futurist, and what is a futurist in itself, right?
Yeah. So I'll start with how I kind of like ended up here. And it starts with college, I think. So I'm the youngest of three kids. And, and as the youngest kid, like you're always trying to differentiate yourself from your siblings, especially if your background is like really similar. We all went to the same school, we did the same activities, and whatnot. So I got to college and I was like, okay, like what did my siblings do that maybe I want to like stray away from? What do I not want? And learn from their mistakes. And I saw that, they both worked in corporate and they honestly hated it. It wasn't something that really added to their lives and enriched them. So I was like, okay, I want a career that actually does do that for me. And then I looked around me at my peers and I was like, well, what's everyone else doing? And it seemed to be that most of everyone else was kind of trying to chase that corporate dream. Most, not all. And so I was like, well, there's a disconnect here between what people want and what they would actually be getting. And I said, what if I could study social sciences and, walk into any room, talk to anyone about anything, listen to understand them, and then bring whatever I learned back to the boardroom where they're making those decisions that impact people's lives. I wanted to impact those lives at scale, in a positive way. So I like to think of, what I do today as sort of this external way of disseminating information to organizations and leaders with the intention of impacting them, right, to make better decisions about how they lead. And also on the other side, for talent and job seekers to level up and demand their worth, right? And so I think that part of things, I started, so like a futurist basically is someone who puts out their ideas about how the world could be, right? And maybe that's their projections, and maybe it's just their opinions on how things should be, but essentially you're basically just like creating content and, you're delivering speeches and you're going on podcasts and all that stuff, in addition to maybe like an industry. So like workplace is this whole industry that I kind of, and along with everyone else in the industry, fell into. And workplace is really it formally was kind of like, how do we design workplaces that are conducive to collaboration and socialization? And it's typically people who have a background in facilities management. So think like planning for events at an office or planning for food, or, kind of like it's not so glamorous from the outside. And those people who do facilities are then kind of transition into, well, how do we actually design a workplace? And what's interesting is over the pandemic, obviously everyone lost their job. Like most people in workplace lost their jobs because we weren't going to the workplace. But then there was a huge resurgence of people, in these companies who need people to help them facilitate a return to an office, or to switch offices if they're going hybrid, or if they're going remote, completely remove the office, but then also help them come together in an effective way down the line. And so like that's kind of some of the stuff that workplace people deal with. And so I consider myself a workplace futurist because I have ideas and dreams really for how I think that like corporate and really any business could function internally in terms of like a people operations standpoint. So yeah.
No, that's actually really interesting. So from what I've sort of gathered from that, so like pretty much your job would be facilitating like at the workplace, like building culture and getting people involved, and like trying to like keep retention of like talented people, and also making sure your workplace is happy, and that type of stuff, and they feel fulfilled and like are working hard towards projects and all that type of stuff. Is that what you'd say like sort of the job, like a little bit of the job title is?
Yeah, I think, and like you'll see it, I think LinkedIn released a study actually a week ago, and the third highest growing job title is head of remote experience, or head of the future of work. So it's interesting because I think that the skills that I've developed over the past year, really envisioning like and digging into like what are different companies doing, and helping companies come to another conclusion to really address their retention and recruitment needs that you mentioned. So and I think it's kind of through bringing people together in a space, right, in a physical space, is how you can deepen those connections and relationships. But it is part of a larger strategy of like the people operations side of things, like how are you getting people together? So it's a very collaborative role, in my opinion, but also a really hard one because you have to balance a lot of different stakeholders, from like the CFO, right, and space planning, to the CEO who has a vision for the culture, to the CHRO who's dealing with retention and recruitment. And then you have, I guess, the other one is like the COO, who's you're helping with operations. And there's just all these different stakeholders that I think like, and that's part of what I do with Workplace Cafe community, is like provide a space for people in workplace to get support, and to also help, the companies they're consulting for on workplace strategy, uh, to help them receive like more knowledge and tools and stuff like that
Yeah.
to help them with their jobs.
Oh, okay, okay. And like just sort of like sort of seeing like what would be like sort of your day to day, right? And who do you think would be like the best fit for this type of to go into this industry and be in this type of job role?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the industry is growing at a rapid pace. So people who are, I think, ready to take on a lot of responsibility and learn really quickly would be great in this industry, because I've seen everyone kind of fall into it in different ways. And there's no set career path. But at the same time, it's like a very, it's a bit like it's a quick path to get to, head of workplace at Adobe, for example. So I guess like someone who wants to try out a really cool career that is maybe untraditional in nature, someone who loves and appreciates design and also loves community, like loves bringing people together and actually cares too. And also, I'll add like part of what I do at Cafe is, we have this like feature where you can add people to your favorites. So essentially, like when you're using Cafe, you can see who's going to the office when and what events are happening nearby. So it kind of gives the person more visibility and like puts them in the driver's seat in terms of when they want to go to the office. And the favorites feature, actually, like we've been digging into the research of like, why do people go to the office? And it's really to see other people. Like you don't go to the office if by choice, if like there's no one there, right? So it's interesting how, I think if you're in workplace, you have to be a people person, and maybe even like as far as like a social butterfly, someone who like, attracts people and gives off really good energy, because you're the one that is, inspiring and creating places that inspire others. So I think that's a really cool part of the job that I think is very attractive to me, because I've always loved, putting people together in a room and like asking them an interesting or hard question. And I think that that's part of the job, but obviously like, I think it's a combination of like having an eye for design and like kind of a vision, and also having a really good sense of like people, and yeah, like wanting to be that catalyst for people coming together. And I'm not saying that it's easy at all, but I think it's, an opportunity to like grow community, which is really
Mhm.
interesting.
Oh, okay, okay. And sort of transitioning now, so with community, being a community manager and stuff like that, it seems like is that sort of similar to being a workplace futurist in the same sort of like realm, or what's sort of the difference, right, to being a workplace futurist and being a community manager?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think one enables the other. Because I'm a futurist and because I have opinions about how work could be, right? I then attract people who buy into my mission and vision and who align with it. So, for example, the other day I wrote like the top 5 reasons people are looking for a job, or like the top 5 things about a job that someone's looking for. And I think at the top of the list was like work and life balance, which I actually like to call it life work integration. And actually, Deloitte and Thrive Global, Ariana Huffington, she's like one of my mentors. Not actual mentors, but like role models, I guess. Yeah. So she and Deloitte came up with, it was work life balance, and then it became work life integration, because it's like work and life are integrated, and balance implies that there's like something to balance, when in reality, like it's all life. And then they came up with life work integration, which is like how, it puts life first and then work next. which I think is how it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, at the top of the list of what people want in a job is that. And I think that being a futurist, I'm able to appeal to like the ideal, right? Like what do we all want our kids' experiences at work to be? And how can we actually make that a reality? Right. And I think that I kind of represent that for a lot of people. I've been told that's like what I've been told. So I think that being, in workplace and being able to imagine a better future by nature fosters community, because community at the center of it is all based around a single shared belief or vision or mission. And I think that for the workplace cafe community, although it's part of work, like what I've tried to foster is like bringing myself to the job and bringing like my beliefs and whatnot. And like the tagline for the community is making work like, or bringing human back to workplace. And I think like that's literally like all of my, personal and professional mission throughout my entire life has been around this single piece of like, there's been this gap in terms of companies forgetting that we are human and that we need to be fulfilled at work. And so I like to think that, by fostering this community, I'm also being that workplace futurist. I'm always also like being the voice for my generation, and trying to make workplace better for everyone at the end of the day, because we're all human and we all want the same things.
Yeah. So how would you sort of get into these types of roles, right? Like like, because it sounds like it's a very like maybe a little bit untraditional, right? And there's not many, maybe there's not like a university degree that sort of like directly correlates to this, maybe a psychology or this like social or something. But how did you get into these jobs, right? And how did you sort of like stand out and get accepted to start being in these types of job roles, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I think what you're doing is a step. Like, can I ask you, like, why did you start the podcast?
Yeah, 100%. So, pretty much the reason I started the podcast is I was in I got into real estate and I was a real estate agent for a bit, and I was trying to have meetings with entrepreneurs and business owners to, to sort of pick their brain and sort of, try and find mentors or trying to learn from people that have already done what I sort of want to do, right? And pretty much I was struggling to get coffee meetings, right? Like I would this was 2019 and I couldn't get I would ask probably 10 people and maybe one person would say yes to a 5-minute coffee meeting, right? It was like pulling teeth. It was so hard to do. But then once I started the podcast, I sort of realized I was like, at the beginning, it was just sort of trying to meet business owners, right? But now it's sort of grown into something a lot bigger. But yeah, that was the original reason, was just to meet business owners. And I sort of learned that when you're trying to meet somebody, if you have a value proposition, you're giving something back to them, right? Like, let's say, you're probably very busy, and like as you sort of get, your career grows, you're going to get more and more busy, right? And you're going to get more people that are aware of you. And, you'll probably start getting people that are reaching out to you being like, hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time, 15 minutes of your time for a coffee meeting? And to be honest, you might be like, well, I've got a bazillion other things that I need to do. Like, it's not really like I can't really do that, right? Because you'll get to a point where people are asking so much. But if somebody's saying like, hey, would you like to come on my podcast, or would you love to do a YouTube video, or maybe I'd write some content for you or give you something, right? You'd probably be more likely to accept that offer and give 15, 30 minutes of your time, right? So that was a little bit long-winded, but that was the sort of the broad idea with starting this podcast, right?
It's smart, because like I remember last year I started writing this book about values-based job searching, and now it's kind of turned into a similar note, but it's more about like, how do you fill in the gaps in order to find the right career and culture for you? And I think it was like the first lesson we were talking about, how do you get these big names to get involved in your book? And I was introduced to this idea of a 5-minute favor. And it's basically like a favor that takes you literally 5 minutes to do, right? It's it's a Google review on someone's app. It's a review on someone's podcast. It's a, endorse you for these skills on LinkedIn, like whatever you think would be valuable to them. You just do it. And then you approach and you say, hey, like, I'd love to talk to you about X or Y. I just left you a review on your podcast. Let me know if you have 10 minutes. And they're so much more likely to say yes to that rather than, just a cold outreach. So, I think like that's a really good, that's just a really good lesson. I think the other way that, I got into this, and I came up with my job title. Like I literally came up with workplace futurist. I hadn't seen it anywhere else before. And now there's a ton of people calling themselves workplace futurists. So I guess like that was good. But essentially I came across this woman last year named Beth Burke. And she is I think she's a PhD. She wrote a book, she's an author. And she writes about hybridity. And it's so interesting because like, up until last year, I was Danielle Farage, marketing and growth at small startup, right? And whenever you introduce yourself, you're like, oh, hey, like I work at blank. And it's interesting because as like, the time of turnover that like we hold a job for like less than 2 years in tech, like every time you join a new company, like that's going to be your new identity. Like that's ridiculous. Like how, like why? So I was like, oh, like what could my identity be if not my job? And so I came across Beth on Clubhouse actually, and I got to workshop my title with her. And, we kind of knew each other before, so she was able to kind of help me, but it was live in a Clubhouse room that we did this. And she said, and she took me through like, a couple different questions, and we arrived at workplace futurist, and she asked me why. And I said, oh, I'm fostering an elevated consciousness around the intersection of identity, culture, and workplace. So like, who are you, right? And how is that present in the culture and in the ways in which that you work at your workplace or wherever your workplace is, because it could live online, right? And so that was sort of the entryway into realizing that I could be more than my job title, and that I actually was, and that I should own that because that's value. And now whenever I introduce myself, I was at a VC breakfast the other day, and it was all about women, and they had a panel. And after the panel, they said, hey, do you have any questions? Pro tip, always ask a question. My hand shot right up, and I was like 100%, like everyone remembered that because I was so excited to be there and to be asking a question, like, grab life by the balls, guys. Like that was kind of my mentality. So and as soon as I say, hey, I'm Danielle Farage, I'm a workplace futurist, heads turn immediately. Everyone's like, whoa, what? And they leaned in. Like I literally saw the entire room's body movement. Like it's crazy. So, and I'll also say this, and I said this on my Instagram the other day, like no one else, when they asked a question, introduced themselves. It was so interesting. I was like, here we are at a VC breakfast, and no one is introducing themselves when they ask the question. It was so interesting. So I was like, okay, always be conscious, right, of like who you are, like how you're introducing yourself, and like introduce yourself, and then ask like an interesting question to a degree. It doesn't have to be the most complicated, but like anything that comes to mind. And yeah, I think like it kind of just starts with asking questions, and it, goes back to exactly what you were talking about, right? Like wanting to meet people and like wanting to ask them about their lives. People love talking about their lives. So I consider myself a culture investigator in my everyday, because I always want to know what the experiences are of my like fellow young people, but also like the 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80-year-olds, like everyone, because you can always learn from someone. Everyone has something unique and different to offer you in terms of wisdom or advice. So Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll shut up, but
No. Like that was actually a lot of good tips there. Like you were saying, is introducing yourself and asking questions. A lot of times people don't do that, and I understand it from a standpoint of like, maybe you're at a VC breakfast and it's a little bit nerve wracking. But just putting yourself out there, you never know, because like all those VCs, right, or the panel, they're going to remember you because you were the first person to speak. You introduced yourself. You were confident, so they're like, okay, yeah. And then let's say, I don't know, maybe you meet them again or something, right? It's just, you've already started to build like a little bit of grounds of a relationship, right? So I think
right,
that's absolutely useful. One thing I wanted
right.
to talk to you about was, I know you're talking about a little bit about this earlier, like in people in tech only spending 2 years in their career. Have you sort of noticed a trend with Gen Z that a lot of like, I'm something I've noticed with our generation is that a lot of people are, changing between jobs, or they have multiple different jobs, or they're doing multiple different things at the same time, where is previously like you look at like, for example, I look at my dad, right? He's been at the same company for 20, 25, 26 years, right? So it's really interesting to see this transition. So is that something you're seeing across the board, or is in select industries?
Yeah. I would say, I mean, I don't know all the trends, but overall, I think that I'll start with our generation. I think that we get bored easily, and that's no one's fault. Like, it's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing. Like, it is just what it is. And the the way that companies are structured, or at least traditional companies, not like these, metaverse
Yeah.
little, like these companies popping up, like those are crazy. But they're like the traditional roles, like they're just a set path. And very early on in college, I remember thinking like, oh wow, like my siblings are going to work for this company for how many years, and like still not get a ton of raises, and like still like be working 100 hours. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And I was like, well, we have 90,000 hours in our lives that we spend working. You might as well put the time and energy into thinking about like what your overall mission is. Because as I saw, like, people around me were like, oh, I'll work at this company for 2 years and then I'll do, whatever. And I'm like, well, like, what is that whatever? Because if you dig into like your larger mission in life, which I did, then you have a lot more direction and clarity and focus. And you won't find yourself 2 years in feeling extremely lost. And like, that's, that's a little bit pessimistic, but like, the point is like, only some people gain that clarity when they're doing that consulting role. Only a few, because realistically, that's like not for everyone. And so I think that like, yeah, I think overall, like, people are working fewer years at a company. And I think that if you're in tech, that's especially true, because the path to success is much shorter. It's like, it's much shorter. I also think that people are having multiple jobs and working on different things, or working on their own personal stuff, which is like partially why I aligned my personal and professional mission and careers, because like I knew that this is a problem that I was super passionate about, and I knew that I wanted my job to relate to that, versus having two separate identities. And I think that's really confusing for people, because like if you're spending 100 hours at work and like you hate your job, like, then like who are you if you're not doing stuff outside of work? You kind of like lose your identity a little bit. And I
Yeah.
think that's really hard. So I think like that's one way that people are sort of trying to flex their muscles in different areas, is by having different jobs. There's a couple of different companies popping up, but like one that comes to mind is A Team. So A Team, they put pods of tech work, like basically like knowledge workers together to get certain projects done for larger Fortune 500 companies. Those are usually going to be people with like 10 plus years of experience. That's not to say that it doesn't exist for people who are younger or fewer years of experience, but essentially the idea is like these people have worked and have a name behind them, right? And like they have this experience. They want to be able to apply that and also travel the world and like not have, not be confined to a location. And they can work for multiple different projects and with different people versus going to an office or like being forced to go to an office like 3 times a week, working with the same people, possibly missing out on meeting other people in other parts of the organization. And like, yeah, I just think that like, it depends what kind of experience of work that you really want to have.
Yeah, 100%. So we're coming to the end here. I've just got a few more questions for you. So one would be, what question do you wish people asked you the most, or what is one question that you wish people asked you more?
I think like actually speaking to what I just mentioned, how do you align your identities, your like personal and professional goals? Like, how do you align that?
Mm-hmm.
And some people don't want to, but I think maybe the larger question is like, how does work play into my life?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So like people asking you questions about that's like, do you get asked questions about that a lot, or not
Not
that
really.
much?
Not really, because I don't think we think about it too much. Like when we go look for a job, we're mainly thinking about how much does it pay.
Yeah.
And like now we're starting to think about, oh, is it flexible? Right. But like we don't think about like, oh, how will this impact my career in like 5 years? Like, will I be able to have children? And like we're not thinking in the future, right? We're like kind of in the moment. And I think that could be a downfall.
Yeah. I understand that. It's like, instead of choosing like, let's say a role for 90,000, right? But you have to be in the office 5 days a week, but you really want to be able to travel, right? But you take a role for 80,000 or 75,000, but allows you to not be in the office at all, right? Or some like that. I know that situation is changing, but just like, just as an example, right? So choosing having that better work-life balance, work-life integration.
Exactly. life work integration. It's like, because I sat at a dinner table the other night with a bunch of my high school friends, and I was like, it's so crazy how like so many of us, even here, are saying, I want to travel, I want to go here and there and whatever. I'm the only one doing it. And like I kind of like put them on the spot. I was like, guys, come on, like live your life a little bit. Like if you don't do it in your 20s, when are you going to do it?
Yeah.
And the only reason that I even have that perspective is because I actually talk to people who are like in their 50s, and they're like, you're doing the right thing by traveling. Like, not that traveling's wrong, but like, if you want to travel, do it now. That's like just my belief. But yeah.
No, 100%. And I feel like I'm guilty of that as well. And I think a lot of people are, they like, people always want to travel. They always want to experience new cultures, new people, see new places, right? But trying to figure out how to align that with your work, right? Like, is this something that could actually work, right? And I think that's a little bit of a hard thing, is like, because some industries it's harder to do it in than others, right? Technology is a little bit easier industry because, like, if you have a computer and a laptop or something like that, you can do that. Whereas, like, let's say if you're in another type role, it's a little bit harder, right? But that might necessarily mean, that you might want to do a switch or something. Because if you're, in your life, you really want to travel, and that's something that's a core of something, and you're not happy, if you're not traveling and taking those experiences, then maybe you need to change positions and go into another type of industry that allows that type of, movability and stuff.
I just want to say, like, I think the immediate thought is like, either I'm in corporate or I'm an entrepreneur. Like if I want to go out on my own, I have to be an entrepreneur. That it's just like not true. Or if I want to travel, I have to be a consultant. Like, thinking about things a little bit differently, like in that regard, I think will be really helpful to people, because you don't have to go out on your own and like be a solopreneur or like do the hard thing and become a founder. Like not everyone is meant to be a founder. And also
Yeah.
like, I think my whole family is entrepreneurs, but like I'm waiting until the right time. And I'm waiting like to learn first. And like being in, this industry for 2 years, like I'm learning first and then I'm going to like do the smart thing, right? Like when the time's right. I
Yeah.
think like a lot of people just kind of jump into entrepreneurship, like maybe a little bit earlier than,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's just,
No,
I'm seeing a lot of.
yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. Like sometimes like, yeah, like sometimes you're not in the right position to become an entrepreneur, if that makes sense, right? Like that's something I experienced. I jumped into real estate as an agent, and that's a very like entrepreneurship type business, right? Where you need to sell, it's branding, it's
Mhm.
marketing, right? I didn't have any experience in that. I jumped into that and lost $15,000, right? Doing learning, but I learned a lot through that process. But maybe if I would have taken, let's say 2 years in another type of job, or learning how to sell, or learning how to market beforehand, and then made a transition into that, that could have been a lot more beneficial, right? So yeah, so
Mhm.
I think it's a really interesting viewpoint. Some people are like, people that are going to jump into it are going to jump into it, and if you like, the smarter move might be actually to wait a few years and gain a lot more experience.
Right.
But yeah, so the last question I have here is, what do you want to pass on to the next generation? At the end of the day, when like let's say you're 80 or 90 years old, like what do you sort of want to sit back and say, like, I passed this on to the next, whatever the gen is, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, whatever. I think the next one is like Generation Alpha, or like I heard it was called Rainbow Gen, but I'm not really
Rainbow
sure. Yeah. Um, I think what I want to pass on, what I want my legacy to be, is that it's possible for you to find work that is fulfilling and to create a fulfilling life for yourself. Like you don't need to rely on anyone or any company, any entity to do that for you. But it's really important to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like
Yeah.
corporate can change.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. Like, that's something that I'm also seeing is a lot of my friends are putting more emphasis on loving what they're doing, being happy, having a happy life, over making, you know, 160 or 180, 100, $200,000, right? And that doesn't not necessarily mean that you can't have both and make both, right? You just need to sort of figure that out, right? Like, how is that going to work, right? But like, maybe
Yeah.
the more traditional jobs align you better with getting into, like, let's say that type of income bracket. But you might not be happy, right? But there's a lot of other jobs out there that you can be really fulfilled and make that type of money, right? Or so it's sort of figuring that out. And actually, I really like that. And I think, like you were saying, is opening that up to the next generation and sort of having them realize, saying like, you don't need to, you're not stuck in a box, you're not stuck in a lane of like, you need to go to high school, university, get a corporate job and stay there for 24 years, right? Now it's
Yeah.
like, even in this world, I'm sort of seeing it's like, you don't necessarily need to go to university, right, to be successful, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah. I
mean,
know someone who's like really killing it in the crypto space. And he went straight from high school. And he didn't actually even finish high school at first. And then he went and like finished his GED, but like he didn't even like finish school. And like that's fine. I think a lot of people feel stuck when like the opportunities are so endless, especially now. Like there is like so much opportunity out there. And I think like oftentimes we sell ourselves short, even like accepting, right, that like entry level role that pays $40,000 a year. That means like your parents have to help you with your rent if you're living in New York City. Like that does not need to be your reality. Like
mm,
I promise, like everyone who makes 40K a year could be making, I mean, could be making more than that.
mhm.
Like I just
Yeah,
know that like for a fact, because there's more jobs out there than there are people to fill them. And
Yeah.
that's literally just statistics. Like I'm not even, I'm not, like it's not even like coming out of anywhere. Like this is like true. And I just think that like our generation, you know, we feel trapped when in fact we're not. Like there's so many opportunities. And I just like sometimes I just want to shake people and be like, you deserve you deserve so much more than this. And like I wish I could help every single person. I just don't have the time.
Yeah.
So like you were saying earlier, like, people ask for your time all the time. Like I just don't have it. So maybe, this book that I'm writing will give people a little bit more than I'm able to one-on-one.
Yeah. And that's the hardest thing, right? Is it's trying to scale the impossible, right? Which is yourself, right? Like how do you scale yourself? And there's a few ways to do it, but at the end of the day, it's still hard, right? To try and get everything you've learned and your experiences out into somebody else, right? And communicating that to somebody else is hard. But we're coming to the end here. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Where can people find out more about you? About like, do you have a website? Do you have any other stuff going on? Where can people find that?
Yeah. So my website is under construction right now. I'm redoing the whole thing, but it is daniellefarage.com. For the moment, you can find me on LinkedIn, Danielle Farage. I am hosting some LinkedIn rooms, audio rooms, which is in beta right now. But yeah, basically like trying to give more actionable advice to the Gen Z generation. I'm also on Instagram, but like most of my stuff is on LinkedIn. And yeah, reach out, follow, set the notifications so you get notified when I post stuff. And yeah, give me some love. I'm always open to connecting with people. So.
Awesome. I love that. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. And thank you to the listeners for, if you made it all the way to the end, I really, really appreciate that. If you have a second and you could smash the subscribe button, that would mean a lot to me. And also, getting Danielle's story out to more people as well. But anyway, I'll see you guys next time on the Max Spence Business Podcast.